And again, the last thing I want to say, immigrants built this country, literally. Actually,
I'm pretty sure everyone has seen this video from the Grammys. This video has seemed to empower some people and highly upset others. Now, in turn, I don't know how many people remember this video from Trump's first administration. This is one of his officials.
Of course, that poem was referring back to people coming from Europe, where they had class-based societies, where people were considered wretched if they weren't in the right class. And
this video really upset people, especially the commentators, people asking the questions. Yeah, so I know a lot of people are speaking about the Grammy video. It really upset my community, you know what I'm saying, the FBA community, because it essentially leaves us out of history. Like, you know, if immigrants are constantly credited for doing this or doing that, then where do we come in? Because, you know, black people who were enslaved in this country were not immigrants, right? So all that being said, I wanted to just go over some points and key facts from the history of the country and let people judge themselves which of those two videos was true, the first one or the second one. So let me run down some brief history and some facts about the nation and the history of the nation, and people can decide for themselves. Okay, first off, starting off in 1790, we had the Naturalization Act of 1790, which essentially limited citizenship to free white persons. So it established a race legal requirement for naturalization under U.S. law. Basically, what this does was in immigration policy, they basically prioritized towards white people were what was immigrating to the country, what was allowed to come into the country. And this is for a very long time. To remind you, this is 1790, right? Okay, then in the early 1830s and the 1850s, this is when they began, you know, really working on the railroad, expanding the railroad and things of that nature. This is really important because at the time, the people who labored and did this were enslaved, black laborers, free black workers, and Irish immigrants. So this is the major infrastructure, early major infrastructure from the South, Midwest, Northeast, etc. All right, now, the reason that is important is because you always hear that the Chinese built the railroad, which is a lie. They did not build the railroad. What they did was they expanded it west. And the reason that's significant is because by the time the Chinese came, slavery had already ended. They didn't want to pay black people to work on the railroad. And anybody who doubts that, because history does lie, America is very good at revisionist history and is very good. A lot of people have a problem with presentism. So the revisionist history part, they love rewriting history that's more favorable towards them. So they like to say that they didn't have enough laborers, so they brought in people from China, which doesn't make sense, because if you, period and point blank, all you have to do is just look at the population of Chinese that they brought over and look at the population of free black people at the time. There was enough people to work on the railroad. They just didn't want to pay them to do it. Okay. So then in 1863, Emancipation Proclamation basically, you know, ended slavery, right? And then, you know, 1865 abolished it nationwide, okay? Okay, now, 1865 to 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad construction. Basically, they used Chinese labor and Irish immigrants again for, you know, to build the railroad west. 1869, it was completed. That's when they did the Golden Spike in Utah. So yeah, 1882, you had the Chinese Exclusion Act. So it's essentially what that was is that the people who came in to do the labor, you know, they were in the country and they wanted to be reunited with their family and they didn't want to bring more Chinese over. That's basically what it was. And then in 1883, this is very important, you had the New Colossus written. Emma Lazarus wrote the poem for the Statue of Liberty pedestal fundraiser. That's the poem where people are constantly here, give us you're tired, you're hungry, you know, you're poor, whatever. You know how the poem goes. So So very important. You have to think about that. If that was written in 1883, you have to imagine that it was only written for white people, just like that advisor said in the video, because you know, black people hadn't even been freed 20 years, basically almost, and they were still dealing with issues in the country. I doubt it. The country wanted more people, non-whites, to enter the country. It's just you know, the facts just prove themselves because it wasn't happening. But yeah, so that goes back to what the guy said. So basically, he told the truth when he said that inscription was for Europeans because that's what it was for. And then 1886, the Statue of Liberty was dedicated, installed in the harbor as a symbol of liberty. In 1903 is when they actually put the poem on the pedestal of the thing. All right. So 1943, you had the Magnuson Act. This is very important as well. This repealed the Chinese Exclusion Act during World War II because they were trying to save face from the Chinese because they were an ally against Japan. And, it's kind of embarrassing, so they basically repealed the Chinese Exclusion Act. But there's one caveat and catch to this. It was only a small quota. Only 105 people per year was allowed to, think about that. So, you know what I mean? You're not guaranteed when you have thousands of people in the country that your wife or your son is going to be let in. All right. Then we moved to 1964. We had the Civil Rights Act, which outlawed racial discrimination, employment. You all know. And then 1965, the Immigration and Nationality Act. This was basically something that the civil rights leaders had been fighting for. They wanted to open up immigration. I think really what their plan was to have allies because basically everyone who came into the country was white. And they all were like on the same page. All had the same benefits, land giveaways, different things, benefits from the government, different things that black people and other people couldn't get. So that's what the community was thinking. But as history has shown, we really didn't have many allies. Doesn't matter if they came from Africa, Trinidad. We had more people who were not really with us than were with us. That's just the sad part about it. But yeah, so 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act ended national quotas favoring European immigration, opened up immigration to Asia, Latin America, and Africa. All right. Now, this is very important. The next point comes up in 1970. Before we get to this point, I want to show this clip by Ann Coulter. This is, I think this will help put this next piece of information in better context.
Book here, mugged on. I think it's on page 151. You write that various groups, feminists, gay rights groups, and those who are defending immigrants have commandeered the black civil rights experience.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that because I think it's one of the most important points of the book. I mean, I think the way liberals have treated blacks like children and many of their policies have been harmful to blacks. At least they got the beneficiary group right. We do have to, we shouldn't. There is the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow laws. We don't owe the homeless. We don't owe feminists. We don't owe women who are desirous of having abortions, but or gays who want to get married to one another. That's what civil rights has become for much of the left. They dropped the blacks after 5 minutes.
Immigrant rights are not civil rights?
No, I think civil rights are for blacks.
Okay, 1970, the Benign Neglect memo. This is written by Daniel Patrick Moynihan while serving in the Nixon administration. The memo suggested the country might benefit from a period of benign neglect regarding racial issues, meaning less intense federal focus on race-related conflicts. So to make a short story shorter, the memo suggested greater public and policy attention toward other minority groups, including Native Americans, Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, etc. And critics interpreted this as a shift in attention away from ongoing black civil rights struggles. So I think when you look at this, is basically, now look at the Democrat Party and think about what Ann Coulter said in that video. It kind of like parallels what's going on now, if you really think about it. A lot of people have accused the Democrats of abandoning black people, even the Congressional Black Caucus. They're all about immigration, immigrants. That's all they're about right now. And we're not saying they don't need help. It's just that where's our representation? That's the issue there. So the 1970s was the beginning of the modern immigration wave. immigration increases steadily under the 1965 framework, growing numbers from Latin America, the Caribbean, and Asia. Now, before I go, I want to say this. Think about this. If immigrants built America, right, and you saw since 1790 up until basically 1970s when they were allowed to come into the country, wasn't the country already built by the 1960s when people were fighting for civil rights, fighting to open up immigration? I mean, of course, now since then you've had some more buildings being constructed, more areas revitalized. Some towns have really gotten on that wasn't on back then as far as like their economic push or whatever. Look at Atlanta as far as like even how they are competing with Hollywood or overtaking Hollywood, however you want to look at it. Those things weren't even around back then as far as like businesses and the level that they're on. But the country was already built, so you can say people added to the building and constructing and different things like that. But as far as building, that's just a lie. Some people would say, well, what about the white immigrants that they were letting in? Well, you could consider that if you want to. But the thing is that by and large, immigrants are people of color. That's the way America looks at it. Just like white people are Americans, right? They would try to call me an African American, or we're foundational Black Americans, Asian American, Indian American, etc., Native American. The only Americans they feel are white people. That's just the truth of it. And they don't consider them immigrants as well. ICE is not looking for Norwegians, and they're not looking for English and Germans and different things like that. They're looking for people of color. So that's just basically how it boils down, and that's the reality of it. So a lot of people would consider the white people, they per se immigrated to the country. A lot of people have been online calling them colonizers more so than immigrants. So just a little basic clarification, because I guess words do matter, and that is, perception is everything, and that's how people perceive the whole situation. All right. Growing numbers from Latin America, Asia, and the Caribbean began entering in the 70s, but in 80s immigration exploded. Now, one thing I would like to point out, anyone who's in their maybe late 30s to their 40s and 50s can tell people about the makeup of America when they were young. In the 80s, the 90s, you can go 70s, 80s, 90s, right? And 90s is really the turning point. That's when things begin to change, begin to shift. And so the reason I say that is because people have a problem with presentism. So this is what I was speaking about before when I said revisionist history, and then you have presentism. So the thing about presentism is a lot of times people will impose their moral standards of today onto the past. So that's one form of presentism people have a problem with. But that's not the case for this one. For this one is assuming today's makeup is like for the past. In other words, let me give you a perfect example. And this is kind of off topic, and this is a touchy topic for a lot of people. So when you speak about Egypt and ancient Egypt, a lot of people get offended, especially, a lot of Arabs get offended, people from that region, and white people get offended if you speak about black people being in Egypt. Make a short story shorter, if you look at the Greek and Romans descriptions of the people at that time, they describe black people, period and point blank. So there's nothing to get away from it. The problem comes in place because these Egyptologists, why do you have scientists or whatever, historians for a particular civilization? I don't know, but that's basically to colonize and conquer the information. But anyway, I digress. So the thing is, they love testing people from the colonized period. They love, testing mummies and pharaohs and different things from the times that they were conquered, and then they can bring the DNA up and say, oh, the modern population right now matches this. Of course, because it's from the period when they were colonized, when they were invaded, when they were occupied. And they don't test, from further back. But they do have a video online where they tested Black Pharaoh, and he came back basically like Sudanese, and they were shocked, right? But anyway, the point of what I'm saying is that the people nowadays, what's made up of Egypt nowadays, which people consider to be an Arab population, they assume that how the makeup of that country looks right now is how it looked 3,000, 4,000 years ago, which is ridiculous. Because, I mean, even if you look at the Native Americans in America, they don't even look like the Native Americans in that 17 to 1800s from the pictures you see. They were a lot darker. A lot of Native Americans now are like very, very white. And so that's the problem. People are doing the same thing in America, because you have a lot of people go online, a lot of Hispanics and a lot of Asians go online and they say, where were the Hispanics at during the Civil Rights Movement? Where were the Asians at during the Civil Rights Movement? So what they fail to realize is that you had Asians and Hispanics in the country, right? But I think you had Asians in more places than you had Hispanics, right? But Hispanics were heavily in California, Texas, and then you had, some in New York, and you had Cubans in Florida, right? Okay, that was the makeup at that time. But they weren't in Alabama, they weren't in Tennessee, they weren't in Georgia, Mississippi. They weren't in those areas where things were happening. They weren't in that deep South. So regardless if they would have participated, regardless of what the history says about them and what they were doing at that time, they weren't in those places and they didn't have the numbers that they had. So their numbers began to shift in the 1980s. That's when it really, really began to change, in the 1980s. And then in the 1990s is when people began seeing a shift. That's when, my whole life has been between Los Angeles, California, and Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville, Tennessee, when I was young, I used to be when I'd be out there in the 80s, they had Asians, they had Laos people who came in the early 80s or whatever, right? So I used to have a lot of Laos friends when I used to live out there. And then I remember I was out there, I think in the early 90s, I stayed with my father, and where he stayed, there were a lot of Kurdish people. So right now, Nashville has the largest Kurdish population in the country, people from northern Iraq. But anyway, in the mid to late 90s is when you start seeing Hispanics come, and then I was gone. I haven't been out there in over 20 years, but the side of town we stayed on, we had a house in an area called Hardin Place, and now there's all Hispanic. Everybody, when I talk to people from Nashville, I tell them where I used to live and where I had. Oh, you lived out there with the Mexicans? That's what they say. But a person growing up, if you ask people from Alabama, from Pittsburgh and all these places, if you ask them hey, when you went to school in 87 or when you graduated in 94 or 95, whatever, how many Hispanics were in the school or whatever, they're going to tell you. And I guarantee you, they'll tell you yeah, we were around Asians. They were around more Asians than were around Hispanics. But the problem is a lot of Hispanics nowadays, because, if a person's 25 years old, right, that means he was born in 2001 more than likely. His whole life, there's been, Mexicans in Alabama. So he doesn't know any other thing. He doesn't know any better. So when they hear these things, his immigrants built America, they believe it, because they don't realize that, probably before 95 or something, was none of them in that state. That's what a lot of them don't get. So that's the form of presentism that's really messing people up. So yeah, immigration began to climb in the 90s, and, by 2003, Hispanics took in the minority population from black people. They became the biggest minority in America. So yeah, that's the facts. That's basically how it's laid out. And I may take the time, maybe I'll do it in a video where I can really go over the numbers I'll go from 1960 and I can go over the numbers in a lot of major cities in America, and you can look at the percentage of white, and you can look at the percentage of black, and you can look at the percentage of other. So you can think about, and the reason I say this is because you think about construction and look at the numbers of people, because in some of these cities, like I say, you may look at Memphis, just randomly. I've looked at the numbers, but I don't have them memorized, and I don't have them in front of me. But for instance, you look at Memphis, like I was saying, Memphis may have been let's say it was 65% white at the time, and it was 30% black, and then it was 1% other or something like that. That's that's how I ran the numbers when I ran it, because I just went white, black, other. So a lot of these places, it was 70-some% white and 15% black, and then it was 1% other or whatever. That's how it was, the weird numbers, but that's how it was coming out. So yeah, it basically just tells you that, so are you suggesting that black people weren't on these construction sites? They weren't working? Where were we at when this country was being constructed? Now, I didn't even touch on slavery. That's something I really didn't want to touch on, because I really wanted to get past that as far as when we really started erecting cities and building cities up. And because the fact was that we've been here since the 1600s and 1700s, and some people even earlier than that. But yeah, so just let the facts speak for himself. One video, a person lied, and the other video, the person told the truth. The video where the person lied, people love that video. It's very popular and empowered a lot of people. And the video where the person told the truth, a lot of people got offended and don't like it. But facts over feelings. That's how I live. Enjoy yourself. There's no hate against anyone. Like I said, I love everyone. I have friends who come from an immigrant background. I have friends they're trying to deport right now. And I love them to death. I'll do anything for them. But I'm going to speak the truth always. You know what I mean? And it's just not hate against anyone else. It's just telling the truth and honoring our history and what we contributed to the country. Because I've been asking this question for a while. What have we contributed to the country? What have we contributed to the world? Like we get credit for nothing. Like we don't even, rap is being taken away from us right now. So like, what have we done as a people? Somebody please tell me in the comments, what have we done? And I'm pretty sure I'll get some crazy hate comments, but hey, live your life however you want.